All right. Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, CMO at BDEX, along with co host Joshua Morgan, content marketer extraordinaire, and of course, David Finkelstein, BDEX's co founder and CEO. Today's guest is Evan Chaisson. Evan is the VP of Product at Written Word Media. Readers trust written word media to help them find their next great book or favorite author. They provide over 1 million readers with personalized book recommendations based on their genre and device preferences via daily or weekly emails. So, Evan's approach to product design puts the reader's needs front of mind. So, thank you so much for being here, Evan. And if you wouldn't mind, could you please start from the beginning and tell us your story? And also, could you please tell listeners about Written Word Media and what you do there?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on. So my story, I guess, to take it way back into history, would be when I started undergrad. I actually went to school initially thinking that I was going to be a computer engineer. Um, Over the course of time, that gradually changed, mainly because it was a little too theoretical for me. I couldn't wrap my head around like everything that they were teaching us as far as circuitry and computer design, and started gravitating more toward a lot of the software pieces of it. So as we started learning things regarding Java and all the different languages that they taught us, those things became more interesting. But at the same time, I was not very good at it. I had to retake a couple of courses in that regard. It wasn't a very smooth sailing transition as far as technology was concerned um, from a course of study. But I also started working full time while I was in college. I actually worked retail through the last couple of years of college, as many students do. And that's not really too new and novel. But what I realized was I actually really enjoyed the customer interactions and really enjoyed kind of learning the product and understanding what went into the products that we were actually selling, and then turning that into a way to communicate that to the customer, kind of meet their needs in terms of what they needed. So in my junior year, actually at the end of my junior year, I decided to change my major to marketing. So completely flipped in my third year of college. Luckily, business degrees have a whole lot of free electives, whereas engineering degrees do not. And so if you look at my transcript, it looks like I was an overachiever taking physics and all these different coding classes. In reality, I just had already taken a bunch of courses. So they translated into my free electives. I was able to graduate on time, and then began to continue my course through retail. I actually thought that I was going to go in a direction of merchandising. Turns out, whenever you get married and want to start having a family, the hours of retail do not play nice with the type of schedule that you want to be able to keep. So I decided, you know what, maybe I should actually lean into this degree that I got, and started working in a small little section of digital marketing called affiliate marketing. And I say it's small, and it's actually a pretty big industry. A lot of affiliates and publishers would argue that it is a very large section of marketing, which is absolutely true. But whenever it comes to businesses, a lot of businesses don't really allocate a huge chunk of their marketing budget to affiliate. What was nice about that was I got to work with a ton of different publishers, all who approach digital marketing in every different way. So instead of me going into a company and kind of learning whatever their focus was, as far as marketing, whether that was email marketing or SEO, like social ads were just getting started at the time. Um, I got to learn it all because I had to know how to interact with all those publishers, really be able to support them. So I got really kind of a broad knowledge of everything that was out there. And eventually that kind of set the stage for me to move into a more specific marketing role. And so moving out of that, I actually went into the automotive industry for a time, worked for a vendor there that focused on email marketing predominantly. That company ultimately started to transition more into a data company. So rather than just focusing on email communications to customers for car dealerships, they actually started helping car dealerships really get a grasp of the data that they had, specifically first party data that they had within their CRMs, and how to apply that beyond just kind of these email blast notifications, but also like very precision pinpoint email communications. I stayed with that company for about 9 years, transitioning in the last 4 or 5 years into more of a product centric role. I actually stepped over and took over a new product that we launched um, very early in its life cycle that was focused on digital CX, so focused on consumer experience, specifically for car dealers again. And because they're all local businesses, we did a whole lot of focus around what their websites did, how they were gathering data from customers through their websites, as well as adding onto that all things like review data and how they were showing up in search, et cetera. So we did a lot of feedback for them, a lot of consulting for them, which was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed kind of the teaching aspect of that. And then ultimately, after building that team, I transitioned into an operations role within the organization. So it was a completely different thing. I went from marketing into this kind of product ownership role into an operations role. But really, kind of the through point for all that was the data piece of it. So whether we were collecting data and teaching dealers how to use that information, or I was collecting data internally for my employees and understanding like how they worked best and how they were interacting with us and our tools that we built. Um, that was kind of the common thread. We were always just working to gather data, understand the data, and then put that to use. Coming out of that, it was just time for a transition. Like I said, I spent almost a decade in that industry, and I was ready for something new. So the opportunity arose with Written Word Media, where I got introduced to Farrell, who was one of the co-founders. Started having conversations there just about kind of what they needed. And over the course of time, that developed into an opportunity, a role there to step in as the VP of product. And again, it was that same through point. So being able to look at the data that we were capturing, look at the information that readers were providing, look at the information that authors were providing, and then build products specifically for our authors to be able to reach those readers that they were trying to get in front of. So I've been here about a year and a half now, closing in on that year and a half mark. And so, yeah, that's kind of my story. As far as Written Word Media, the company does do exactly what you said, Jesse. We do connect readers with their next new book, their next author that they want to engage with. But more than that, we really exist to support the author. And that's really kind of where things start is we want to develop products and develop services for our authors to be able to reach those readers. And so we get to work on both sides of that. So we get to work with our authors who are our customers. They're the ones who are seeking placements and ad services that we're providing to be able to get in front of those readers. But at the same time, we can't support the author well if we don't have a reader base for them to market to. And so we have to work on both sides of that in terms of engaging readers, finding out information about them, who they want to read, or the types of books that they want to read, and then ensuring that they actually are presented with that information. So we can't just kind of broadcast, kind of what I mentioned before in the automotive space. We can't just kind of like throw it all out there and hope that something sticks. We actually have to be very targeted in terms of who we're sending what information to. And so that's a core function of what I do on a day-to-day basis is take a look at those products, make sure that they are getting authors in front of the readers that are best suited for them. And it's a lot of fun because a lot of our authors are first-time authors, they're independent authors. So beyond just getting to help them sell books, we get to help support their dreams. Like a lot of these authors I've been wanting to write a book for a very long time, and we get to help them put it out there and to the masses.
Very cool.
That's really cool.
That's great, Evan. Yeah, that's a great intro. Appreciate it. And thanks for joining us today on our podcast. So you seem to have an interesting background in product. And obviously, everything is becoming pretty data centric these days. I'd be interested in exploring sort of how you see the influence on data products. So, gathering customer data and using it to make better products and services, it's obviously an age-old strategy, but the process has changed a lot, right? I mean, it used to be a long process, taking sales data, and surveys, and focus groups, and it often wasn't linked to individual consumers, right? And so certainly wasn't all linked together.
Right.
And now we have this sort of internet connected product, right? And you can automatically collect information on customers and include sort of their product journey in that and link that with all kinds of other data automatically, and adjust the product experience to reflect those findings, right? So these developments basically make data-enabled learning much more powerful than they used to be, right? But they don't really guarantee defensible barriers. So I'm curious, in your opinion, where do you see this going? Like, to what degree is a competitive advantage provided by a data-enabled learning, sort of product, and is it sustainable?
Yeah, not only do I think that it's sustainable, I think it's going to become the expectation. So again, like the lens that I look at a lot of things through is kind of that customer experience, that end user. And we live in a really fascinating time where, because of this data enablement, personalization is just the expectation now. You go to Amazon, you go to any retailer that you've been to before, like they're showing you what you want to buy. They're taking past history and they're kind of serving that back up to you. And that happens everywhere. In the automotive space, when I worked there, you're going all over the internet shopping for a car. You've looked at SUVs, and then suddenly you show up on the Lexus.com site, and all the big hero images across the page are just SUVs. You're not seeing their sports cars because they know that that's not what you're interested in. And so I think the bigger lesson here, or the thing that kind of makes an opportunity for vulnerability for companies, is not learning the skill. I think that we've been down this path where we've kind of brought up a group of marketers who learn to leverage certain metrics. There's certain data points that you look at, and then you build your strategy against that. So at one time it was, you look at Google Analytics and like, what's the time on site? And so everybody's so focused on, how do I keep people on my site so I have a really good time on site, because that's the end all be all. And in reality, like, it fostered so many bad behaviors. Like, you have the advent of pop-ups and like things to deter people from moving off of a site. Like all these things that customers absolutely hate, like things that drive them insane. Not to say there's no value in them, but for the vast majority, like, it's again just type of just playing toward a specific metric that maybe isn't the best metric anymore. So now I think this is going to be an ever evolving thing. I think that marketers in particular, product developers, are going to have to learn to ingest this data as it becomes available, and then be ready to pivot, make those changes along the way. If anybody kind of thinks that they've figured out the recipe, they figured out like the secret sauce of how to do these things, I think that's where the vulnerability comes, because as we've seen, especially more recently, like things are moving way, way, way more quickly in terms of the advancement of personalization, AI, et cetera. All those things are becoming more accessible, and therefore you're going to see it on a more widespread basis. And so it's not going to be a novelty. Again, it's going to be the expectation that we're looking at.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that more and more tools are coming out, and I think more tools will evolve, and everyone will realize that no product is ever done, right?
Right.
You never have a finished product, right? Because you learn more as the product is being used by the customers, and you continuously change the product to meet the customer's needs. So, and these tools will enable people to do that more effectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have a question from the audience. So thanks, Clark. And he's asking, do you think bad web design is like bad cold calling in the 2000s?
It's definitely an analogy that I had not thought of, but I would not disagree. I think that's pretty accurate. A lot of it just comes down to being like kind of tone deaf. It's, you're going to make that cold call, or you're going to put a website out there and you're not going to hear what's being said on the other end of it, then yeah, you're kind of missing the mark, and you're kind of defeating the purpose. I think a lot of these things, a lot of these practices, I mean, even looking back at cold calling, like they all start in a good place. And a lot of it has to do with information gathering. I mean, that's where we are today. Just the tactics of information gathering have completely changed. The problem is that, again, if you just foster bad behaviors out of that because you're not kind of seeing how things change over time, or you feel like you're going after a specific metric that doesn't actually serve the customer, like cold calling, for instance. How do I get my numbers in for the day? How many phone calls can I get in? You're missing the mark of actually having that conversation with the customer, figuring out what they need, and then being able to meet that need. Same thing happens on the web today.
Yeah, I think cold calling is getting less cold in
Yeah.
many ways, right? Because you have a lot of data to sort of clue you into, am I calling the right prospect, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you're using that data, then hopefully by the time you reach that person, they already know who you are. They can, they're already investigating this product or service, or they have a need, and you're there to address that need. So.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we can see where a lot of people, the mantra is going towards show me you know me. And so rather than just trying to like, hey, buy my stuff, we're reaching out and saying, hey, I understand that you are frustrated with A, B, and C. If we can help solve those solutions, would it be worth your time to have a discussion? And so, it's not necessarily I'm trying to sell you something. It's that I'm trying to help solve a problem that you're frustrated with.
Yep.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Well, switching gears a little bit. Next question for you, Evan. How fast does the relevance of user data depreciate, in your opinion?
I really think it depends on the data that you're capturing.
Mhm.
And I mean, you have to be smart about that. Like whenever you set out to build a product, you kind of know the information that you want to collect. That doesn't mean that's the only thing that you're going to pick up along the way. But if, for instance, you are going out and you're gathering data about kind of where people are in just their life, how many are married, how many have kids under a certain age. If you collect that information today and don't revisit that data 5 years from now, like you have a really terrible message that you're sending to that person. Like for me, I still get direct mail, even some emails from like baby formula companies. The
Right.
youngest child I have right now is a almost 4-year-old.
Oh, man.
So
Mine's
it
20
just
and
kind of goes to
mine's
show.
20 and I still get that. No
See,
joke.
exactly.
I have
That's
still
crazy.
gotten baby
Same.
related stuff, and my daughter's 20.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So I think if you go into it with a heads up approach of knowing like, here's the data that we want to capture and here's how often we're going to have to refresh that to be able to stay relevant, then that goes a long way. There's going to be some data that doesn't really change that much. So for instance, whenever we capture reader information, we have somebody, our goal is to get readers to come sign up for an email list where they're going to get a daily recommendation. One of the things that we want to see from them is what genre are you interested in? That's probably not going to change week to week unless they're just like, I'm really fixated on vampire romances right now. And suddenly the whole Twilight just fandom falls apart and they want to go somewhere else. It's not changing week to week. So what's going to end up happening is we're going to be able to rely on that data pretty consistently over the next 6 months, 12 months, probably even longer than that, because those are things that people grew up reading certain types of novels. They want to continue to read those types of novels. Now they might add things on over time, but it's likely not just a complete overhaul and a complete shift. So in that regard, like we have to measure that. I don't think that you can really go into it and just say like, we're going to capture it, we're going to set it and forget it and never have to worry about it again. I think you still have to monitor it. And whenever you start to see kind of that diminishing returns off of that data point, you definitely have to be reading the next signal and understanding like how we continue to evolve the information that we have for this particular customer.
So Evan, as of 4 days ago, as a former writing teacher, I have kind of a really deep love for what, the product that you have. And also as somebody that started writing a novel 6 years ago and has put it down I don't know how many times, and would like to pick it up. And eventually, it comes back to sometimes we go, well, who even would read? How do I reach my audience? How do I get people to say, oh, let's read Josh Morgan's book? And so a couple questions I have is, because you can get on Amazon, you can get on other sites. How did you guys determine that this was a solution that was needed outside what was already offered? And what are the steps you have taken to like build the audience to make them aware that your company is there?
Yeah, so I wish I could take credit for any of it, but it all predates me by a lot. So when Ricky, our other co-founder, kind of set out to start this company, it was kind of an offshoot out of her working to get readers for a book. She was actually working with, she was working for a marketing agency. She ended up kind of pivoting her focus over to this. And the goal was really initially to learn kind of how you get in front of these audiences. And she did a lot of that through Facebook advertising initially, which is kind of one of the first, while shielded, it's one of the first instances of kind of augmented data that we have available to us, because you can start building things like lookalike audiences and the like. But she just started featuring this book for free because Amazon allows you to do, for an independent author who's like a Kindle Direct Publishing author, they can run these promo days. So they can basically put it for free for a period of 5 days. And then she was able to promote this book. And people were like, yeah, I love free things. So sign me up, like show me this and show me more. And then other authors were like, hey, does that actually work? Can you do it for my book? And that's how Free Booksy was born in the early days. Like it started as Free Booksy. It started as a place just to be able to showcase a free title and tell customers about it. There was a lot of Facebook advertising that was driving customers to that point to be able to say like, hey, come here, get a book for free. Everybody loves free, so that's great. And then it evolved over time. So as we got more information about not only the readers, but also the authors that were interested in promoting their books, we started realizing like how we needed to target. We need to start diversifying. And when we're collecting that information about the readers, we need to have them tell us, hey, what types of books are you interested in? So again, in the early days, a lot of that was driven through social media advertising. We would kind of present the information. You could target based on interests. So obviously, like if they're interested in reading, if they had e-readers, we could start targeting based on that to be able to start drawing the attention of those readers. And then we direct them over to the Free Booksy site, eventually the Bargain Booksy site. Red Feather Romance came down the line, New In Books, that all kind of had their own special focus. And we could begin to capture those readers' attention because they had like a daily source to be able to get this information. As we talked to different authors and understood what their needs were, where they were struggling to be able to get in front of audiences, we could then pivot and start looking for those audiences, start cultivating those audiences and build them up before we ever offered a product in their genre. So if we had somebody who approached us and was like, hey, I'm writing romance books, I need somebody who's interested in romance to be able to buy these books. We started digging and we started building, and eventually that spread into all these subgenres of romance. So you've got paranormal romance and romantic suspense, sweet romance, historical romance, because you've got this whole array of people who like different types of books in that genre. And as we build up those audiences and develop readers for these authors, we can then approach those authors that we've talked to who have expressed interest in those areas and say, hey, we've got something for you. And so it's kind of keeping, again, both sides of this equation in check. We have to make sure that we're keeping tabs of our authors and the things that they're looking for, the types of books that they're writing. And at the same time, making sure that we actually have the audience to support that. And they're not mutually exclusive. Like we don't even go looking for an audience unless we know that there's authors writing in that. But at the same time, we're not going to be promoting to an audience until it's there. We're not going to force romance books on mystery readers, for instance, because it just creates like a bad experience on both sides. So it's constant listening. It's constant just updating the information that we have, and then pivoting accordingly to make sure that we're building the right tools to be able to support it. Since then, that's actually evolved beyond just email promos. We're now doing ad services. So we do Facebook ads and Amazon ads on the part of the author. So that's a reader reach product that we actually launched back in September. We just launched Amazon ads in the past couple of weeks. But it's more the same. Like, we use the information that we gathered through the email side of things to understand the types of audiences, understand how those readers behave, not only the genres they're interested in, but also what devices they're using, and how often do they actually want to engage with these emails. Not everybody reads 30 books in a month. Some people are only going to get through one or two. So we have to understand that about the reader, so we're not overwhelming them, like sending them constant emails to say, like, hey, here's some more books. And then they fill up their Kindle and they're just stuck and they have no interest in reading our emails anymore because they've got such a backlog that they're overwhelmed by. So same thing, we take that information that we've learned about those audiences, feed that back into the ad platforms, and we're able to get authors a whole new audience on those two different platforms as well.
So, what have you guys learned? As far as some people use surveys, some people use questionnaires, some people. Which have you found to be the most effective to get that accurate data from your customers? And then what have you been able to learn about your customers from your product user data?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the things that you learn very early on with working with authors is they're all in very different places. Some are just thinking about writing a book. They have an idea, but they've not put pen to paper. You've got the ones that are maybe like you, Joshua, who they've started and then they stopped and then they start again. They're not quite ready to bring it to market. And you've got the one who wrote a book, they published it, and it's just sat there on the shelf and haven't been able to sell it. So one of the first things that we do anytime that we engage with an author is actually figure that out. Like, where are they in the process? We actually do that through survey forms or for sign-up forms. So a lot of what we do is actually derived out of email sign-ups. We gather that data right up front. From there, we're able to start sending them down a pathway where we have other opportunities to gather data. So whether that's additional surveys, maybe that's just blog posts that we can send them to, and then measuring off of the engagement that we get with that, we can actually see whether or not that's actually of interest to them. Because, and again, we have to continually be learning. We might think that somebody who is starting to write a book, but they don't know how to start selling it, needs to know about how to publish to KDP, but they might have no interest in publishing an ebook. So we'll send them that article. If they actually engage with it, then we move them forward in the process and continue down that path. If they ignore it, then maybe we start talking about more of a traditional physical publishing process. But like I said, we can do kind of a combination of gathering the information up front. Beyond that, we then look at engagement data. So what are they clicking on in emails? What are they looking at on our website? And all of those signals are tied back to that user. So we keep that tied to the individual. We're updating variables in our email list to make sure that we can pivot on that information as needed. And then on the reader side, it's a lot of the same. So whenever somebody signs up for an email on Free Booksy or Bargain Booksy, one of the first things they tell us is what genre do they want, how often do they want to get an email, and what devices are they reading on. Those are just baseline pivots that we can make. From there, we can start to see what they actually engage with. If they actually sign up for thriller, for instance, but they never actually click on one of the thriller books in our email, it might not actually be what they think it is. They might actually be thinking mystery is thriller. And so we have to do some education with that, either through blog posts that are on the site. We have full life cycle messages or life cycle flows for both authors and readers to account for these different things. We're watching that information and making the adjustments accordingly. And then it's always presenting the opportunity for both an author and a reader to make adjustments. Whatever they signed up for to begin with, presenting them with the opportunity to update those preferences, go back to the site, change your genres, pick something different. And so we watch that. On top of that, we also use at varying points, we look at things both at a broad level. So we take our entire reader list, for instance, and we'll start identifying trends that we see there, and then drilling down further and further and further until we can see like smaller pockets where we can apply changes and adjustments to. Or we might also do like the traditional like focus groups or UX interviews and things like that. And we actually had a consultant who did some UX interviews with us for some of our reader sites, and it was super insightful because it gave us a whole lot of information about what we were getting wrong, and what hypotheses we had that were right. So in our world, it was all about the email for a long time. We're going to put this in an email, we're going to send it to you, you're going to click on it and buy it, and it's going to be great. But we actually had quite a few users who used our websites. So Bargain Booksy, Free Booksy, if you had looked at them back before the end of last year, you would have just seen kind of a daily blog roll of here's the deals for the day, here's the free books for the day. But we realized that readers are actually looking for a little bit more there. So we've actually changed the overall look and feel of their sites now to where they're more not data oriented, they're more content oriented. So we're actually writing blog posts now. We're actually kind of educating readers a little bit more through that, and providing some additional touch points that we didn't have before, because basically we were only getting the same data points that we got from the email. Did they click on this feature or did they not? Same thing was happening on the website. We didn't get an additional layer of data. Now we actually have more data to go on because we can see if they're not clicking in the email, what are they going to on the website? And we can do more analysis from that point of view.
That's really cool. And a good segue into the next question, which I'm excited to ask you about your tech stack. And as a startup marketer myself, I've been put into a position, multiple times where I'm forced to sort of think about how are we going to collect and use product user data, prior to launching something. And so, we don't have a product marketer or VP of product on board yet. And what I found is that while marketing analytics and business intelligence tools are essential part of a modern tech stack, they're not built specifically for analyzing product user data. So, the former won't give you the depth of data you need to understand what users are doing in your product after they land and sign up for your page, for your app. And so, the latter requires an outsized investment of time and resources for the same result. So I'm curious, what tools do you use in your tech stack to help you collect user data and decipher it and store it compliantly?
Yeah, so we're pretty scrappy over here at Written Word Media. So we don't have a ton of data analysis tools and things like that we lean on too heavily.
Mm-hmm.
We do use all of your standard like marketing analytics stuff. So whether that's Google Analytics, any type of email analytics that we get through sell-through, RESP, we are able to kind of aggregate all that stuff and analyze it in a lot of different ways. But anything that we've wanted to capture in terms of individual user data, we've built ourselves. So we have our own database that is kind of the backbone of our application that powers both our purchase path as well as our author dashboard. And it also powers our internal system that we use to actually facilitate generating the emails and delivering them, and managing all of that. With that being said, there was kind of a blind spot in terms of data interaction that I had whenever I first came in terms of who's doing what in the system. Like I knew that things were getting changed, features were being updates, links were changing, dates were moving for when features were happening, but I had no idea who was doing it. So one initiative that we did early on was apply logging across our entire system. So now anytime that anything happens in the system, we know who did it, we know when it happened, and if we're doing well, we have notes to back up why it happened. But even if we don't have that, we can usually pinpoint when something happened, who was doing it, and then we can facilitate the conversations around why this was going on so that we can make adjustments as necessary. What that means is it's a little bit of a mixed bag. So we have internal users who are making updates based on customer support requests. So an author writes in and says, hey, I had booked this promotion to run on this date. I actually need to move it to this other date. So they'll actually reach out, and it's our team that's actually updating that. Other times, if it's somebody in the author dashboard who maybe hasn't ran a promotion in 90 days, maybe it's time to run another promotion, and we give them that signal in the dashboard. We see when they engage with that book that they ran previously, or they engage with that promotion that they ran previously, and actually click the button to like rerun promotion. So then we get to see like, okay, was it just that they just happened to remember? Was it the email that we sent that said, hey, it's been 90 days, or was it the actual dashboard? And we can start to look at all the user flow throughout the dashboard. We can follow all those actions that they took, whether it was in the email, so we have that information via sell through, as I mentioned, or cobble that together with the data from the database, where we can query and see, okay, when did this user ID show up? When did it interact? And then marrying those two pieces of data, we get the full picture. We understand how they got to where they were going. And so we're looking at that on a pretty regular basis, whether that's from a troubleshooting perspective, or sometimes I'll just want to know like what's happening. And so I'll kind of sit down, I'll just pick a user ID, and I'll kind of follow them for like a 2 or 3 hour span just to see like what happened in that time frame. And especially now, as we're like doing a lot of work and focusing very heavily on giving authors kind of a base of operations within that author dashboard, that's becoming even more important, because we really want to know how they're using that tool, how they're interacting with it. Not only so that they can book more promotions, which we would love for them to do, but also so that they have kind of a centralized resource where they can keep tabs on what they're doing from a marketing standpoint, and also just kind of have a good view of all the books in their backlist that they need to promote, or that they have the opportunity to promote.
That's a good point. I mean, it goes back to what we were talking before about how a product's never done, because once you study those sort of customer journeys and you start to realize, how come, what seems obvious to you, the people that built the product, is not as obvious to the people using it, and you're like, how come nobody can ever find this feature? It's like,
yeah, I mean,
and then you realize, wait a second, maybe we need to move it.
Yeah, absolutely. A very recent example actually is I was kind of looking at data to see how many customers were checking out while logged in. And I just noticed like a large number were going through the checkout flow and they just weren't logged in. I'm like, why not? Like, if they're logged in, they have all their user information there. I don't know if this is the end all be all reason, but one thing that I noticed was actually Clayton on our marketing team noticed was that anywhere in the purchase path, if you click the login button, it kicks you all the way back to your homepage of your author dashboard. So if I had that experience at any point as a customer, I would avoid it at all costs, because I'm already halfway through buying this feature. I don't want to go and have to start completely over. So little things like that, really understanding where those roadblocks are, and then resolving it is a huge step that I think any product developer should always be thinking about, as how do they reduce that friction point? How do they get the information to find out where those friction points are?
This reminds me of a couple things that we had issues with in ed tech, where we would get a product, and in order, rather than everything being like a nice flow, we do our attendance, we had to log out, go to another program that was made by the same company, then to do our grades, then log it out of that and go to another program also made by the same company, but we couldn't log into two programs at the same time. And it's like, who designed this? But so as far as like the collecting and like the storing of data, what is, where do you feel businesses kind of slip up the most?
A couple of places. One, I think it's very easy in this day and age. Like I mentioned, like data accessibility is everywhere. There's a lot more access to machine learning, AI, just data pools that you can tap into. So I think one place that businesses slip up is they get really excited and they're like, give me everything, and then they don't know what to do with it. So that's one issue. And then I think the other issue kind of stems from that to some degree, is that once you have the data, you either get overwhelmed by it, or you're just like, okay, I got it. Now I don't know what to do with it. And then it just sits there. And then it runs into the issue that we talked about before in terms of how long is this data good for? Because if you get it and you're like, I don't know what to do with it, so we're just going to let it sit for a minute. By the time you actually come around to it again, it's expired. You're kind of starting this whole cycle over again. So I think those are the biggest issues. One other one that I would definitely flag is around the issue of transparency. I think a lot of businesses, and it kind of stems again from not knowing what you're going to do with the data. They can't be upfront with their users about it. If they don't know how they're going to use it, it's very hard for them to have a transparency statement of this is what we're going to do. And so I really think businesses, before they go down this pathway, really need to think about, what information do I need? What information do I want? And then how's that going to benefit me? What am I going to do with this? Once you answer those questions, start gathering the data. And you might, something that our fractional CTO tells me all the time is he tells me, you're going to get it wrong. And that's okay. And I've had to kind of like adopt that mantra a little bit, because I hate being wrong. I'm very much the like, let me think out all the steps, see where anything can go wrong, and like make sure it's right. But he has kind of instilled this idea of like, come up with a plan. It might not be the perfect plan. You might not get everything right, but that's okay. Just get started moving in a direction. You can always iterate later. You can always collect more data. You can always change what you're doing with that data. But make a plan up front. Once you get that in place, start capturing the data and then act on that plan. Don't just capture the data and then sit there. Like, actually do what you said you were going to do. So 3 places, just to kind of reiterate on that, is not knowing what you're going to do with the data, gathering the data and then just sitting on it, and then not having like clear transparency for the users whose data you're collecting, are kind of the 3 areas that I think a lot of businesses fall short on. And if I could give any advice, that would be kind of the one that I would give as it relates to any kind of data. And that can be marketing data, user data to influence product development, or even internal data. If you're working with a team, you're capturing data about what time people are clocking in and out to go to breaks. Like, just be upfront that you're doing it, and then let them know why. Like, again, internally, maybe you just want to know, like, when should we schedule meetings so that people aren't blocked and they can't go to breaks? Perfectly legitimate reason, but you actually have to be upfront and tell people. Otherwise, they feel very like Big Brother about it, and they get uncomfortable.
So, good point. So, actually, further to that, you talked a little bit about enriching data or supplementing your data, and how companies make a mistake because there's so much data out there, and they get they don't know what to do with it, right? So, what's your recommendation? How would you recommend to our listeners the sort of more tactical approach they could make to supplementing or enriching their data? And further to that, is this something that you guys do today at Written Word?
Yeah, I would say we do it, but not to like a huge degree. And one of the reasons is because of the advice that I would give. Unless you have a very deep background in data, it can be very challenging, and there's a lot of different ways that it can go, and you can think yourself into a million scenarios of how you're going to approach this this problem and solve it. So my recommendation would be start small. Look at small ways that you can enhance your data that's going to be immediately valuable, so that you can start to see it work. And then from there, I would say, if you don't have that deep knowledge, or you don't have an internal resource that does have a deep knowledge of data and all of the things that go along with it in terms of privacy concerns and things like that, find a good partner. Look for somebody who has the information. They know what you can and can't do in certain arenas, because those are big missteps that anyone can take without even knowing it. So those would be my 2 first steps: is start small. Beyond that, find a partner who can help you guide through it if you don't already have the knowledge internally, or take the time to learn it. There's tons of resources out there that are available, and you have the opportunity to learn. But again, somebody like for myself, like I started my marketing career well over a decade ago, and a lot has changed since then. So if I wasn't working in it, staying on top of it on a day-to-day basis, I would feel very behind at this point. And there's a lot of people who are going through kind of more of a traditional marketing background who have a little bit of catch up to do, and that's okay. Look for the resources, whether that's a partner who can help coach you through it, or somewhere that you can just learn and get the information that you need.
Great point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So David and Evan, with Google's, cookie deprecation coming up and first party data is all the rage. And since product user data is part of your first party data, how would you recommend people leverage it to help once cookie deprecation, happens in 2023?
David, you want to start
Evan?
on this one? Or?
Sure, I can go first. Absolutely. So look, for one, like we've been saying, collect it, measure it, understand what your users are doing within your product is most important, because access to third-party data is going to get more difficult with cookie deprecation. So it becomes more important for you to use the data that you have access to actually understand your customers, right? So that's first and foremost from my perspective. Then once you're doing that, there's a lot of ways you can leverage that. And so, we're, as most of BDEX is kind of more on the machine learning side as far as using that first party data. So that's just something that we've, we launched a product for, and that's something I'm always plugging on this podcast, obviously. But we see that as being an important piece of the future, where you're taking that data that you're collecting and using machine learning in a way that will enable you to further understand your existing customers, or reach new customers that look just like those customers. And so that's something that we talk a lot about on the BDEX side.
Yeah, I mean, and just kind of to add on to that, I think we all have to get a little bit more used to narrowing our focus. I mean, if we've seen anything in recent months, even relying on kind of the higher level stats will not serve you well in the long run. And that's really what third-party data gives you. It gives you a very broad picture. And as we move to a point where personalization is key, we need to be able to tighten that lens. I mean, some of the things that we've already done at Written Word is we used to, just like every other email marketing agency that was out there, like you look at opens and you focus on that and you make decisions around that. In reality, we have to get closer to the action. So now everything that we do is a much tighter focus. We're focused on engagement directly versus just whether or not somebody happened to get an email and they maybe accidentally clicked it in their inbox. Once you start looking at the engagement data and you get a little bit lower into the actual engagement path, the story becomes a lot clearer in terms of how people are interacting. And so I don't think this is a bad change for the marketing space, that we are moving away from third-party cookies and moving more toward first-party data. I think it's actually going to help us meet customers where they are. It's going to help us meet users where they are, versus taking some of these leaps and these big guesses that we had before. And in reality, we used to have to. We used to not have the tools to be able to give us that information. When you think back in the day when billboard marketing was, like, you just kind of had a rough count of how many cars drove down that highway, but you had no idea how many actually looked up, how many actually jotted down that phone number, how many actually called you because that's what they saw. Now we get to live in a great day where we can get all the way that close to the action and we can see exactly who's doing what and their motives behind it. So I think it's time for us to just take advantage of that. And while it'll be a painful shift, just because we've built a lot of process around third-party data, I think it's going to be one for the better, especially for the end user.
Definitely.
Yep.
Well, thanks for that. What would you say is the future of product user data, and what makes you most excited about it and most paranoid?
Start with the most paranoid. That's always the fun one. No, I mean, as with anything, like whenever you start talking about data, big data, or whatever,
Mhm.
the concern is always that there's going to be a bad actor out there, and even a well-intentioned bad actor can really mess it up for everyone else. So that's something that I always worry about, is that there's going to be someone who chooses to misuse the data that they have. It's a very Peter Parker, great power, great responsibility situation where. I think as companies start engaging with us, they have to be very thoughtful about how they use the information that customers are offering them, even if it's just passive in terms of the way that they interact with applications and things like that. Um, so that's what I'm paranoid about. I'm always paranoid about that, is that someone's just going to use the data poorly.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I'm really excited about the fact that we are getting so close to the action and we do get to see what's going on. One of the things that's always just appealed to me from a marketing standpoint is understanding why people do what they do. And that also translates to product. Like I really like looking at data and looking at interactions and trying to figure out how did they get from point A to point B. And what would have happened if you had moved this button from here to there, and kind of running those different scenarios and figuring it out. What's great about first party data is it kind of gives you more steps in the journey. So, I mean, it's just the same thing as if you have a point up here and a point down here. It's a long straight line. But if you start filling in the points in between, you really get to see the curve that the customer
Mhm.
actually followed. And that's what really gets me excited, is the fact that we can start to see that in much sharper clarity. And those who are paying attention to it can actually implement that into the products that they're building. They can implement that into their marketing strategies to, again, really meet those customers exactly where they are, versus it just having these tone deaf approaches like the baby formula advertisements that I mentioned earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Evan, I got a question, and this is I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mason Crosby over there on LinkedIn, and he runs a podcast, and he's like a big advocate for getting people into marketing that have no prior experience in marketing. So,
Mhm.
here's kind of out of curiosity, that's based on your experience. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice if you were getting started, and one piece of advice to those that are getting into marketing, what would it be?
Ooh, loaded. Yeah, I always go back and think about like, what would I have done differently? I mean, I think my story actually kind of speaks to this a lot. There's not like a clear path in the marketing field, which is great. I, again, like started pursuing engineering, that shifted into marketing, and I came out of that into operations and then product. But the one piece of advice that I always give everyone, I have a lot of people who just ask me like, how did you get started in product? Or before, when I was in marketing, they asked me like, well, how did you get here? How did you get started? And I think for me, the biggest thing had to do with me just flipping a switch in my brain that was like understanding that I've already been there. As a user, as someone who uses different products, you understand what you like and you understand what you don't like. Taking that and then trying to flip onto the other side of that and understand like, okay, like how do I apply these things that I know, these things that I've experienced, and fix the problems for people, delight and surprise people with good experiences. That's where I tell people to start with your experience as either someone who's been marketed to, or start on the product side, start with your experience with products, because you've seen the good and the bad. Everybody's gotten the bad marketing pieces, everybody's gotten the great marketing pieces. Start there and understand it. From there, on the marketing side in particular, I remind people that marketing is very broad. There's a lot of different types of marketing out there, and I encourage them to investigate all of them. I really kind of hate that marketing oftentimes in college for kids is lumped into this one big like marketing umbrella, and they teach you the base principles, which are great. Like you need to know them, the whole like 4 Ps or whatever it is. I've already forgotten it at this point. Those are great things, and they're kind of like the foundational principles of everything. But you market to customers in all different areas of their life. And this is becoming even more so with kind of the connected lifestyles that we have. Everybody's got a phone in their pocket. Cars are more connected. Every device in your house is more connected. There's so many opportunities to market to people. So I encourage them to investigate that, like look into the different areas. Or you can end up like committed to an area of marketing that's either like on its way out or something that you really just don't enjoy that much. You like the general premise of marketing to people, but like the medium that you're using isn't satisfying. So take the extra time, like see what's out there and understand it more broadly, and then dive in. And if you get the opportunity to work somewhere that like lets you touch all of it, so much the better. Because that was my experience with the affiliate marketing, as I mentioned before. And I definitely would not have been able to make half the choices that I did throughout my career if I had not had that experience early on of being able to see, just have that front and center seat to see all the different types of marketing that were out there in the digital space.
Very cool.
That might have been more than one piece of advice, but
I think I agree.
Okay.
Anything anyone else would add before we close?
No, I think this has been great. Appreciate it, Evan.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Course. Thank you so much. And in closing, we would love to get input from listeners about BDX's. I guess it's not really new anymore. We've got 5 published Spotify episodes now. But yeah, I guess it's still our new podcast. And also, are there any guests you would like to suggest we interview? And I guess that's a question for the audience and for you, Evan. Anyone you'd like to give a shout out to that we should reach out to?
There are so many people that
Putting them on the
have really
spot.
kind of yeah, there's so many people that have kind of like shaped my journey through data. But I mean, even within our company, Farrell Vernon, our COO, he was there from the day that Written Word was started. He could probably give you much better insight into how things developed over time than I could. Our fractional CTO that I referenced earlier, David Rash, is just a super smart guy and teaches me on a daily basis about how we can apply things from the data side. Has really been instrumental in how we've kind of shaped data and prepared it in even the recent weeks as we're prepping toward new products. So some incredible guys there, but tons of people in the space, super smart people that are out there. I loved catching up on the past episodes of this podcast over the weekend, getting to hear people like Chris Daly speak and hearing their background. So appreciate what you guys are doing. Keep putting the episodes out because it's great for me to even be able to continue to learn from others. And I look forward to listening on.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I appreciate those suggestions. If you wouldn't mind, if you're able to get back to the LinkedIn event and tag them in it so we make sure we have the proper spelling. I mean, I'm sure we'll find them under your company page, but we'd also love to hear from the audience in the comments about what questions you want to hear. We want to keep this focused to what you want to learn about in terms of data trends and advertising and marketing around identity and machine learning and data privacy and just the future of marketing in general. So please send any and all feedback to info@bdex.com and share your qualitative feedback back with us. So thanks again, Evan, and everybody for being here with us. I'll go ahead and end the broadcast.
Thanks, Evan.